In the last video, I got the drawer pull tabs installed for the vanity, as well as finishing out these two shelves for the storage cubby. Click the information card for that video. In this video, we're going to build a hidden storage drawer for the camper right down below. And if you haven't yet, definitely subscribe. Thanks. The first thing I have to do is get the dimensions for the drawers as well as the platform that the hamper will sit on. Alright, so let's go over the dimensions that we're working with. The height of the opening is 35 inches and the width is 18.5 inches. The depth is 14 7/8. So I'll give you a little visual there. My hamper is here. It is 25 inches high by 14 inches square at the bottom. Okay, so 14 inches there. So hopefully that makes sense. I have a little bit of room up here for some drawers. I'm going to do two 3-inch drawers above for smaller toiletries and whatever we want to put up there. So the first thing I'll do is I'll cut out the two 3-inch drawers, and then I'll worry about making the platform for the hamper later. One thing that I learned about cabinet making is you want to make sure that you want to cut the similar dimensions all at the same time. In this case here, since my drawers are 3 inches tall, I'm going to cut the 3-inch dimensions first. Later, I'll come back and cut the actual pieces down to the appropriate length. That way, later when I go to assemble the drawer and the drawer bottoms, everything will be nice and flush. And you definitely don't want to forget your dust mask. So I got these cut out 3 inches wide, which will be the height of the drawers. I'm going to use a 1/2 inch bottom. Ultimately, the height of the drawers will be 3.5 inches, which we have some room to play with. I'm not too worried about that. I'm going to cut this down to the appropriate length, which will be 13.5 for the depth of the drawer, and then 16.5 for the width of the drawers, because I have to accommodate for the drawer slides as well as the thickness of the material. When building cabinets and drawers or drawer fronts, you definitely have to be pretty accurate with your dimensions. You gotta make sure that you're properly taking into account all the hardware dimensions, all the wood thickness dimensions. That way your drawer slide for the drawers will work properly and everything is going to be nice and square. I have this scrap piece of white oak that I'll be using for the drawer front. There's this pretty cool knot that I want to express in the drawer fronts. It's going to be hidden behind the shiplap so you won't really see it, but I think it's a nice little detail to include. I'm using 1/2 inch plywood for the drawer bottoms. You can use 1/4 inch. I didn't have any birch 1/4 inch laying around, so I just went ahead and used 1/2 inch. Normally, I like to break down the larger sheets of plywood with a track saw. This was late at night and I couldn't do it outside, which is what I usually do. So I went ahead and just ran it through the table saw. This was a 1/2 sheet, so it wasn't that bad. Another tip when making drawers is to try to reference the cuts off of the actual parts that you're going to use for assembly. In this case, I'm using the drawer side as well as the drawer front and back to give me the dimensions for the width of the drawer bottom. Then I'll use my cross cut sleds to give me the final length. and I can just roughly assemble them together, make sure everything looks good. These aren't very fancy drawers, so I'm just going to use pocket holes, screws, and glue to hold the sides and the bottom together. This is a very simple joint that is very sturdy and very reliable. You don't have to worry about this thing falling apart. When you're installing pocket holes, you want to make sure that you have your pieces nice and secured together at a 90 degree. If you don't, the pocket hole screws could potentially move your joint out of alignment and you won't get good results. For the drawer bottoms, I'm just gluing the entire perimeter and then using some screws to screw it down to the drawer slides. For the white oak fronts, I'm using the same method as I did before, which is to reference dimensions off of each other. Here I'm referencing the drawer slide to the drawer fronts so that there's enough clearance whenever I go to install it into the cabinet. Once I got the drawers completed, I went ahead and did the platform for the hamper. It's the same process as making the drawers as you saw before. The only thing that's different is I'll be using a plywood front instead of a white oak front, since this drawer will be directly attached to the shiplap panel. To install the drawer slides, I removed the rail piece from the entire slide, attached that to the top of the drawers, and I made sure that on both sides it was equal distance from the top of the drawer. That way, whenever I install it back into the slides inside the cabinet, it'll operate properly and the drawer will be nice and level. At the cabinet, I measured the distance from the bottom of the drawers to the middle of the rail. That's where I'm going to mount my slides. The critical dimension here is the bottom of the drawer to the top of the hamper. I don't want the top of the hamper to get in the way of the drawers that I'll have above. Therefore, the location of this slide is critical for me to maintain the clearance needed to open up the drawers with the hamper and not have it snag the drawers above. This rockler jig is really convenient for installing drawer slides. It allows you to set the height for one side of the drawer slides, and with the rod you can simply reference off of that to get the other side, as you see here. So both sides will be equal distance from the bottom of the cabinet. There's a lot of jigs out there that you can buy or make yourself. You can always simply use a spacer block to reference where you need to install your slides. So there's many ways of doing it. The important thing is making sure that both of the slides on either side is equal distance from the bottom or the top of your cabinets. Now the hamper fits perfectly, a little bit too perfect. The backside gets in the way a little bit. So what I did was I cut out the backside just a little bit to give me a little bit more wiggle room so we can take the hamper in and out without having it get stuck. Here I'm installing the drawer slides without the jig, just to let you guys know that it's possible to do it without any special jigs. All you have to do is cut a block that is a certain dimension that you need and then use that same block for the other side to make sure that both slides are installed in the right location. Since the spacers don't hold the actual slide like the jigs do, you might need another hand. And in this case, my wife helped me out. It was a little bit hard to do this myself, so I really appreciated her help. This is probably my favorite part of the build, which is these unique white oak fronts. I think it adds just a very nice detail to the restroom. The next part is to build the shiplap front that covers the hamper as well as the two drawer fronts so that the entire thing looks seamless in our shiplap wall. It's not a true hidden drawer because there's actually a vertical seam. If I were to do this again, I would have ran the shiplap vertically so that the lap portion could be integrated into the fronts so it looks more seamless. The shiplap came primed from the manufacturer, and it's not good to apply glue to that surface since the glue may not bond to the primer. What I did is I just used a sander to sand out the surface, exposing the wood right behind the primer, and then from there I'll apply my bead of glue and put the panel together. Since I'm using push to open drawer slides, there is about 1/8 of an inch play, which causes the drawers to stick out of the cabinets about 1/8 of an inch. So I need to create a groove in the back of the shiplap panel so that the drawers could recess into the panel, and that should accommodate for that 1/8 of an inch gap. I'm working on the panel in two separate parts. The first part is the lower section where I need to create the grooves for the drawer, and then the upper part will be just solid and there's nothing needed to be done there. So doing it this way is a little bit less cumbersome. I don't have to work with the entire large panel. I can just work on the smaller portion at the bottom and then combine it later with the entire panel. Now it's a matter of marking the area where I need to create the recess for the drawers, and the drawers will sit nice and flush up against this panel. That way it'll account for the 1/8 of an inch gap or 1/8 of an inch play that is needed to operate the push to open drawer slides. Now once the workpiece is secured to the workbench, I'll go ahead and measure out the depth that I need for the recess and then use the router to route the entire area out. And now for the test fit. Oh yeah. At this point, everything was going superb. The panel was lining up with the panels on the wall, and everything was looking perfect. The fit was perfect. I was really excited to get it done until I glued everything together, let it set overnight, and then this happened. The entire panel bowed. I'm not sure exactly why. I mean, I kind of do. I think the laps for the shiplap, whenever they were milled from the manufacturer, it's not necessarily flat and 90. There's a little bit of an angle taper to it. I thought if I put some plywood in the back of the panel, it would straighten things out. Similar to what you would do in wood frame construction, which is to add strong backs for the roof joist to help with ceiling sag. I thought that would be able to work here. It did help a little bit. So I went ahead and did that. I cut the panel to the size that I needed and then hoped for the best pretty much. It ended up not working. It was really frustrating at this point, trying to see what I could do to make it work. Things were just bowing out of place, and then sadness came. As you can see, we still don't have a drawer front. I think I'm just going to go ahead and scrap it and start all over. I just didn't really like how the front was bowing too much. The lap portion of the piece of shiplap is not really cut straight, so whenever I glued it together, it created the bow. So I also tried to add some reinforcement in the back to kind of flatten it out. It helped a little bit, but it just didn't really cut it for me, at least for what I'm trying to do. My initial thought, and I wished I had followed through with that, was to go ahead and use plywood or MDF to create the panel. So it will be a kind of like a faux shiplap front. It won't be exactly, you know, true shiplap like we have on the walls. It will definitely give the same look that I'm trying to achieve. It will be a little bit thicker so it won't bow in the end since it's one solid panel. So I wish I had followed through with that and went ahead and gone through with that method. I was hoping that the shiplap would work, but as you guys can see, it didn't turn out the way that I wanted it to. So I should have just went ahead and went with my original plan. And now that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna go ahead and use plywood for the fronts. I thought about using MDF, but MDF does swell up if it soaks up water. So since we're in a bathroom, I don't wanna use that. There's marine grade or outdoor grade MDF, but that's a little bit expensive. So I'll go ahead and use 3/4 inch plywood. I'll create grooves around the edge and wherever I need to pocket in the drawers. Since it is a 3/4 inch thickness, I need to make sure that it's going to line up with my 1/2 inch shiplap. So it's getting complicated, more complicated than I wanted to, but that's what we gotta do to make it work. So let's do it. It would have been easy for me to simply cut the video there and said, everything went great. Yeah, it worked out fine. But just like everything in life, sometimes things don't go according to plan. And that's okay. You just gotta scrap that original plan and tell yourself that you should have followed your gut, right? In all seriousness, this entire process is just trial and error. Whatever you're doing in woodworking, you're doing it one way one day and then the next day may not work. You just gotta figure out what is the best way of doing something and pretty much problem solve it. Here I'm just cutting the plywood sheet down to the appropriate width, and then I'll go ahead and cut the length by cross-cutting it on the table saw. Since this sheet of plywood is 3/4 of an inch and my shiplap panel on the wall is 1/2 an inch, I need to make the same recess for the hamper drawer as well as create a rabbet on the entire length of the front panel so that the plywood panel would sit flush with the shiplap wall, and it would allow me to have about a 1/8 of an inch play for the push to open drawers. I made most of the cuts using the table saw, and then I went with the router to clean out the recess. And in the end, this is what it should look like. Since the plywood is a solid panel, it doesn't have the shiplap look. So I need to make the grooves inside the panels to line up with the shiplap and make it look seamless and continuous in the wall. So I'm just using my track saw, cutting it about maybe a 1/16 of an inch to an 1/8 of an inch deep into the panel. That would give me enough of a recessed look to make it look similar with the panels already on the wall. So this drawer is pretty long and it's going to be flimsy when I pull on it. So what I did is I installed this second drawer here as a way of supporting the entire length of the drawer front. And that would give me some stability so it doesn't really bend as much whenever I go to pull it out. The only difference about the top one is that I used a regular drawer slide. That way when I push to open the bottom drawer slide, the top one simply just rolls out at the same time as the bottom. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to secure the front to the two drawers. I'm going to use some spacers at the bottom, some papers as spacers for the bottom, and then that should give me levels so that I can get some brad nails in, and then I'll go to the back and screw it into place. This method turned out a lot better than the previous method. I wish I had gone with that first, but you know, you live and you learn. What can you do? So I'm going to go ahead and install the panel to the drawers with screws, and then I'll go ahead and apply 2-layer of primer and then 2-layer of paint and call this project good. I really loved how this turned out. It was a big learning process for me to get the shiplap looking the way that it needs to be. And the hidden drawers just makes it look really unique. I really love that small detail. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please consider subscribing and also hit that like button. Thanks.